I'm Carrie Peters, a recognized thought leader in the Microsoft Dynamics community and a Microsoft MVP for business applications. Welcome to the Get Your New View podcast. Keep listening to learn how we work with frustrated Business Central and NAV users who struggle to use their system and find the answers that they need. We teach them to truly understand how the system can support their business processes to make immediate and lasting improvements. As a result, they get more done in less time, make better business decisions, and even love their system.
So our last session for the day, Belinda Allen talking about Fabric with Kim Congleton. And I hope you guys really enjoy this session because this is the latest and greatest. We love having Belinda on to talk with us about these topics.
My name is Kim Congleton. I'm here today with Belinda Allen. She is an MVP, a rock star, an amazing person. I'm honored to have been able to learn from her and also call her a friend. So I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then we're going to talk about Fabric, which is one of my favorite topics lately.
Thank you, Kim. And I'm so glad to call you friend too. I am Belinda Allen. I am a Microsoft Fabric MVP. So I love Microsoft Fabric. And for a living, I am the Director of Enablement for iLink Digital. We're a global organization. We have a very large data team and a very large AI team, and I'm part of that combined team effort. So super excited to be here. And I've been in the Fabric space since its inception. And in private preview before anybody knew about it. So that was fun. And also I've been a Power BI MVP pretty much since its inception as well.
So I didn't actually realize that. So the MVP since Power BI. When was that?
8 years ago. I was a Dynamics GP MVP for the 5 years before that. So this last July, I was just awarded my 13th MVP.
We kind of decided to have this discussion because we were both at Summit. And one of the things I kept hearing a lot, like walking around the expo and kind of walking around the halls, I kept hearing some BC users say, what is Fabric? You know, like what's the difference between Fabric and Dataverse? And I was lucky enough to go to like Power Platform and I've been reading on it and I know you, so I know a little bit more, but I thought I'd maybe talk about what is Fabric? How do you explain Fabric when people say, what is it? I have no idea what it is.
I'll give you my elevator pitch on it. So I'll keep it simple so we don't get into the weeds. Although, just say squirrel and I'm off, right? So be careful. Let's start with the initial comment about, how is it different than Dataverse? And then what is Fabric? It is not even close to the same thing as Dataverse. It is data related, but Dataverse is, I like to think of it as a cross between, forgive me for saying this, SharePoint list or Access and SQL Server is kind of how I think of Dataverse. I love Dataverse, but Microsoft Fabric is the data side for data analytics, the management of the data side. Now, if we all have got to know Power BI, and in Power BI, when you connect to your data, usually we import it in. We don't do a direct connection. We import it in and we model our data. We make changes to it in Power Query. And that whole process, we typically call ETL, extract the data, load it into the model, and then transform it so that we can create reports on it. So Power BI is an important element of Fabric. But Fabric is more like Microsoft Office in a way, where Microsoft Office is a combination of several applications, Word, Outlook, Excel, and so forth. Fabric is end-to-end solution for data, and Power BI is one of the applications in it. So that's the application we use to report by. Well, that process we do in Power BI ETL, people who have more complexity to their data or larger data models have typically broken up their Fabric or their data management and data exploration and data transformation into other elements before they bring it into Power BI for a variety of reasons. I mean, the complexity, we're talking people with really large data sets. When it comes to BC, honestly, if someone is distribution, the way the data structure is for BC, in my experience, when someone has manufacturing and some other elements, especially anytime you're getting that item, ledger, entry table involved, complexity arises. I mean, it kind of is, there's a lot there. I don't know what they've done in the background that makes that much complexity. So that's a great example of why you might want to use Fabric. So what Fabric does is it separates what we call the compute from the storage. So the storage is actually the semantic model, and it allows us to do work on the data before it gets to the semantic model and separate. So they've taken a lot of pieces from Azure that people were using. Azure Data Lake Storage, Gen 2, also known as Databricks, that's in there. We have our own data factory for pipelines. We have a data flows that work specifically for Fabric and well for Fabric. In engineering, we have notebooks, so you could use Python or use Spark as its foundation, so you could programmatically make changes to your data using Python or PySpark or T-SQL or Scala or HTML or even R if you happen to be someone who knows the R language. So that's a capability of doing that. It brings in machine learning and experiments. It even can handle real-time analytics. So there's a lot of different pieces or workloads or experiences. Microsoft often calls them experiences that exist with Fabric. So it's all in and about managing the data before the data gets to the analytic layer. Before it even gets to the semantic layer. So then once you've managed all your data with whichever tool you're comfortable with. So if you don't know Python, no frets, right? There's other avenues. I was super excited. I am learning Python now, but I know T-SQL. So I was super excited that SQL was an option for me to write T-SQL. And so I frequently use Copilot to help me translate my SQL into Python. And it does a pretty good job. I only have to make a few tweaks. So that's working out for me as well. But it's all about that compute and storage and one of the things, they're all then unified, just like we have in Office. So licensing is better. It doesn't cost as much because you're just paying for the capacity and the workload as opposed to licensing each product. But then all the data is stored in an area called OneLake. And Microsoft likes to call OneLake the OneDrive for data. And so all the data gets stored in the same format, and the format's called Delta Parquet. And then any tool you have, and Delta Parquet format is not proprietary to Microsoft. It is considered an open data. That doesn't mean anyone can get access to it. It's highly secure, but that means if you have another application that could read write Delta Parquet tables and you set up security to allow it, it could read the data that's in Fabric as well. And that also means you don't have to move data around. Well, it's pretty cool, that item ledger entry table I talked about. We bring that piece of data in and we have, let's say, Kim managing that. That's her baby, right? That alone. Well, if I want to build a report that uses it and I have another workspace, I don't have to copy her file or I don't have to go and create my own. I can literally create a shortcut to her data in her lakehouse and use that without having to copy the data over again. And she could manage it. So that's much easier. And because all the data is in OneLake and all the experiences are in this unified SaaS scenario, Microsoft likes to call it SaaSified, then governance becomes a lot easier. So Microsoft has Purview. Purview is getting better and better, and Purview will allow a much better governance scenario. So I hope that kind of clearly explains it. It's very much like workload experiences together that enable us to work on our data before it gets to the semantic model even. And then all the data technically gets stored in OneLake. And so we don't have to copy some things over. And they made it easier to even get data back and forth. Dataverse is, if you have Dataverse set up, then you could actually even create like shortcuts directly to Dataverse, which is pretty darn cool. So you don't have to move the data in. Much easier. And the entry point is for cost-wise in the licensing. I normally run away from licensing, but I will share this for the VC space. I mean, Microsoft's sweet spot is the F64 SKU. It's pretty pricey. It's like $5,000, but that's where anyone who consumes report only can use for free, and it has the copilots. But you can get started as low as like $250 a month, plus your pro licenses. You do have to have that. So you could start pretty inexpensive and still have a lot of those capacities available to you. You wouldn't have Copilot, but you would have available the rest of the pieces, and you basically pay for storage and compute time. So very cool ways you can do things because you're breaking up the data and you're separating it all. You don't even have to upgrade that full data model anymore or refresh that full data model anymore. You could just refresh the individual components when they are updated. And in Dataverse, if Dataverse is always good data, if you have it syncing, you don't even have to schedule a refresh. It'll just stay always current. So lots of really, really cool things. I mean, my mind is blown on a regular basis. At night, recently, they are announcing that they're putting in a database. It's built off of a SQL right inside as well. We'll see how that ends up filling in, but I'm kind of excited about it. So that's it in a super nutshell. That's a lot, I know.
That's
but
a lot.
And Power BI is still the same magical tool that we know and love. We just use it to connect to the SQL and more. There are a lot of Power Query experiences in other elements, other workloads of Fabric. So you're still being able to leverage your knowledge. You can create your semantic model in the cloud, connecting to all the different sources that you're using, and then even create your DAX in the cloud. And then that way you have so much more capability. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. I'm just sitting over here with my mind blown too.
I know, right? Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah. So, and also I kind of was thinking about like the actual name, right? So, you know how it's always the running joke on Microsoft naming products, but in this case, it almost seems appropriate.
Yeah, there's a lot. The term Fabric, it's a little bit pervasive in the world of data. So it definitely is a good name for it because it does cover a lot. And there's a lot of different elements that are all very interlocking and integrated or woven, if you will, into something pretty powerful.
So how would somebody get started with Fabric? Like if they're looking, let's say two scenarios. One, just a company that's, trying to say, how do I build, better reporting and what can I use for my backend and how is that all going to work? And then two, from a person trying to learn what it is and how to work with it.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a great question. One of the things that I would suggest, just like Microsoft has these free workshops, a dashboard a day, we call them DIADs, DAID, or DIAD in a day. Yeah. They have a FIAD one, Fabric Analyst in a day. And you can sign up and attend one of those free. They're virtual. Most of them are virtual. And it is a full day of training. It's a great way to get started. I've conducted 13 this year myself on behalf of Microsoft. FIAD, in that one, it's a scenario of, hey, I have Power BI. I'm a premium user, but it wouldn't really matter if it's a pro user or a premium user. And I have a Power BI report. And I have these 4 data sources, and these are the challenges I have. And so what we do is we go through the exercise of doing a proof of concept in Fabric to solve those issues. So I would love for any of you to attend one that I'm conducting or that iLink is conducting. It's a free resource from Microsoft. So you do have to plan to be there the whole day because the labs build on themselves, but it's hands-on. And then another option that you have is you could sign up for the 60-day free trial Fabric. So go to Power BI, and then on the profile icon in the top right in the cloud, Power BI in the cloud, click on the profile icon, and then you should see sign up for a 60-day trial. For the last year, Microsoft has just been renewing them for a while. So I've had my free trial for over a year now. and they keep renewing it. And so I wouldn't put your only version of real reports in it. Keep your old version, but you can use it for your real reports just to try it out. But don't delete your old version until you purchase, because you don't want to all of a sudden have them say, okay, we're done giving out the free trial. And when it gets to the end of 60 days, you're stuck without your report. If you go in there, there's also a Microsoft Learn, a lot of sessions there. Also happen to be a Microsoft certified trainer. And there is an exam certification, the DP 600. And so they have a lot of the content ready for the class. They just haven't like opened up the classes yet. So that's another way that you can do it. But Microsoft Learn has some great documentation on it. And then also starting March 30th, I think, there's another FabCon, Fabric Conference in lovely Las Vegas. And I am planning on going. Weirdly enough, Microsoft just opened up the speaker submissions. But before that, like for the last month, they've had it up, the slide up. And someone said, how did they list who's a speaker? What did you do? And I'm like, what? And I went and looked. If you go in the speaker, sure enough, myself and my teammate, Stephanie Bruno. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe they'll have me doing a session there again. So I sure hope so. It's an awesome conference by the same people who did Power Platform Conference. So if you want to start out small, I would suggest start out with the free workshop and then start playing with it on your own at that point. I think that would give you a lot of hands-on experience and help solidify some of these things. Because once you realize, this piece just does this. Oh, okay, I got it. Then you realize the concept of Fabric is not as out there as you thought. You'll just be like, oh, okay, I get it.
So I know you've been working on some projects, and obviously you can't say any names. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, like, what's the coolest thing you've done with Fabric in the last year?
Oh, well, we have one thing. We have one client who is a major national food chain, and we've been using real-time analytics. So every time you go to their business and you order something, the data flows through to Fabric. And we can see literally, within seconds what people are ordering. So that's a pretty cool one, being able to do that. That one's probably my favorite. The other ones mostly evolve because their data is so big. Like we have one client who is just about to go over the threshold to a petabyte of data. And so I know that's like crazy.
That's insane.
It is insane. And then another one that we did, they called us up, and this is what I've submitted a session for Fabric Conference based on this. They called us up and they said, they have another enterprise level system that they use for ERP, and it's got letters in their name. I'll just leave it at that. And then they were trying to implement forecasting, and they do forecasting on what their costs are and what their product sell is for each of their products. So they want to be able to get the product sale, get the cost, get the unit price, and figure all that out. And they do forecast. And so they were implementing a forecasting system that comes with another system. And they were really struggling making it work. I mean, really struggling. And then this quarter that we're in now was looming in on them, and they had to get it done. And so they're like, well, help us get it in Power BI. And I'm like, okay, this is you're trying to make a data analyzing tool and application. I'm like, well, let's go about a different way. But one of the things that we showed them, and we did, and they ended up doing it through Python instead, or through DAX functions. But one of the things I showed them in Python, because Python's there, I was like, there's a library in Python that will actually do a forecast. And you can then not only will it forecast it, but it'll also put all the forecasted numbers in a separate table in Fabric. And then you can actually build reports that compare to this live ongoing forecast. And that was just really cool because that solved their whole issue. And then they we also like to be able to make adjustments to it. We're like, well, let's just throw in like a Dataverse table and build an app that writes to the Dataverse table all the adjustments that that you have. And then now we can add that in as well and factor that in. And then we can even get a little more granular so we know who made the adjustment. And we can even have a description field why they made the adjustment. I mean, that kind of opened things up, and it basically turned a reporting tool into a bit of an application, which is, Microsoft is all happy because better together. And so that was Fabric, Power BI, Power Apps, and Dataverse all just singing and dancing together.
No, that sounds pretty cool. And actually, that gives me some ideas for some users in PC that I know have some forecasting issues. So
yeah, so I submitted a session on forecasting using notebooks and data science because the machine learning has some capabilities in there. So if they select it, I'll have to write the session.
Yeah, no, there's so much you could do there. Now we're getting sidetracked. Now I'm like off in my own little world here.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we'll kind of wrap it up here, but what are some tips you would give somebody when they're first starting out working with Fabric? Like, what are maybe some lessons you learned or some things you came to realize pretty quickly when you were working with it?
So the first tip I would do is start with what you already know and then build. So with Power BI, you already are familiar with Power Query. So I would suggest start by ingesting data in Data Flows Gen 2 because it is a Power Query experience. And as a matter of fact, you could pull up your Power BI, open up Power Query, and just copy what you have and paste it into Data Flows. And it should work for you. You might have to set up some credentials, but it should work for you. I would start with that. That is the slowest method of ingesting data, but you already know it. And so it gives you your foot in the door, and then you can make changes as you go along. If you do that, I also recommend breaking up your data sources individually from each other. So unlike Power BI, we don't have to put them all in one data query. Separate your data sources out so that you're not going to be confined to refreshing the data all at the same time. You can refresh everything when it's appropriate, not everything at once. That'll make the refreshes smaller and put less pressure on less workload on your capacity. So I would recommend separating those out. I then would make sure that, especially some of you that have come from the nav world on-prem, you probably already have a little bit of SQL under your belt, T-SQL. You don't have to learn a lot, but I'd be open to learning a few things like at least the basic select from and where, and then maybe how to join a couple things together. There's some visual ways you could do it, so you don't even have to learn SQL, but you're going to be better off if you do have a little bit of SQL knowledge under your belt. I would even almost say that might be more important than Python, but Python's much more powerful. And then be open to learning a little bit of Python, at least just enough to read it. With Copilot, you go in and say, I want to create a Fabric notebook, Microsoft Fabric notebook that does this, and you're going to likely get some of the code. So, but for starters, I would say stick to data flows because you already know it, and separate out your data sources so that you could refresh things individually. I think that's going to be a big deal. And relax, because Power BI is still the Power BI we all know and love. It just can handle bigger data.
I'm super excited to hear you say SQL because that is like my first love. Like if I can spend all day in SQL in a database, I'm happy. So it's funny how that all comes around again.
Yep. When it first came out, I was like, wow, all this T-SQL, score. And then data flows, I'm like, Power Query, score. And then the pipelines, if you happen to use pipelines, data factory pipelines, the functions that you build in pipelines, and you could do some pretty cool, complex stuff with pipelines. The function piece is basically the same type of function builder window that we see in Power Automate. So again, I was like, score. So, but I still feel the need to learn Python, but I haven't had the need to learn it quickly, nor learn it immediately. So don't let that part stress you out. I guarantee you'll want to learn it as you use it because you're going to see some things in there that it does that are really darn powerful. You could document your whole data model using Python because we have something built in called the semantic link. And you could go in and document all of your measures, document the relationships you have set up. You can just do some, that documentation or that semantic link. Every time I see it, my jaw drops. But you can start simple, start with what you know, be comfortable with it, get a feel for it, and take it and grow it as you need. I mean, I could see a lot of users in the BC space saying, okay, I don't think I never have to go beyond data flows. I mean, I would, and that's okay. If that's the way you want to do it, that's perfectly okay. You still can take advantage of a ton of Fabric without doing that. But don't let Python bit scare you. And all honestly, I wish I was lying when I tell this story. Python's been out forever. I remember, this is how long ago it was. So when we were living in New York, I remember being in a Borders bookstore, which was on the ground floor of one of the World Trade Center buildings. They had one of the best computer book departments. So my husband and I would go down there a lot and hang out. And I remember sitting in the window with books, tech books, but there was a whole section on Python, even then in there. And they had a snake on the front or a rat or something. And I'm like, I don't want to learn anything with a snake. And then as I started learning Python now, I found out it was named Python after Monty Python's Flying Circus. And I'm like, well, that changes everything. I should have learned it all along because my favorite color is blue. And those of you who know Monty Python will get that. So
That's amazing.
Isn't that crazy?
It's crazy.
I did not want to be involved in a snake. So, yep. And it turned out to be Monty Python.
Well, Belinda, thank you so much for your time. And this has been great. And I'm sure you'll have a lot more people sign up for your Fabric in a Day session. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and get a free ticket out of this. So, yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Fantastic. Belinda, I'm with you. If they put a snake or a spider on a book, I'm going to have nothing to do with it.
I thought it was snakes. I was like, oh, no, I'm out of here.
I love it. We've got one question in Q&A from Chris, who says, is there the ability to set up an automatic incremental refresh when bringing data into Fabric from BC?
Yeah, there's a couple different ways you can do incremental refreshes. You're not going to want to do them with data flow, so you'd have to get a little more complex, but you definitely could. And I played in the data side of BC a fair amount. And I never was able to, I haven't played with it in the last year, but I was never able to get the integration to Dataverse down where you could set up some virtual tables. But if you could do that, then you wouldn't even need to do refreshing. What you could do is create a shortcut to Dataverse. And a shortcut would be just like a shortcut on your desktop. So it's not the same thing as like direct access. It's much faster, because you're just connecting to the data. You don't even have to move the data in the first place. So I would try that. But yes, there are some incremental refresh methods. Typically, pipelines would be the way you'd want to go to do that. You might just use pipelines for the refreshing process. And that's definitely something you could do for sure. Good question, though. Yeah, because there are tables in Business Central that are very complex, in that it takes a while for them to refresh in Power BI. I talked about the item ledger entry table being one of them, but I've witnessed firsthand how it could feel very cumbersome and slow while you're waiting for it to refresh and to do some things. So that might be a reason to go to Fabric on one of those lower SKUs just to be able to take advantage of some of the other elements. Because the only thing you wouldn't get on that entry level SKU as opposed to the F64, which gives you copilots, and you would have to buy license for a pro license for everybody, even report consumers. Once you hit 64, you only have to buy it for the people who build. Anybody who consumes it gets it free. So there is a there is a point where it's cheaper to go that way. But BC can get, especially when you're dealing with things like manufacturing and some of the other ones, it can get a bit cumbersome getting refreshed. Using some of the methods that they've provided, that Microsoft has provided. So I would definitely check that out.
Damn.
But it's fun. Yay, love data.
Yeah, no, that is wonderful. I love watching you guys geek out on that. So thank you very much for presenting with us this week and answering some questions.
Did your team ever really get good training to understand how to use your business software? Do you think you could use more features of your software if you just knew how? Are you frustrated with inefficiency that never seems to get better? Do you suspect that there just has to be a better way, but you don't know what that is? We believe every company can benefit from increased efficiency and higher utilization of their software, and that it's possible to have fun while learning exactly how to do that. The experts at NewView Strategies work with frustrated Business Central and NAV users who struggle to use their system and find the answers they need. We teach them to truly understand how the system can support their business processes to make immediate and lasting improvements. As a result, they get more done in less time, make better decisions, and even love their system. Please contact us at getyournewview.com to get started.